No matter how silly or serious, Idaho's wildlife play a major role in our daily lives, whether we realize it or not.
What's that one in the back doing?
From the small to the tall, animals truly live among us, and we among them. But to maintain harmony among species, a delicate balance is required, and that's not always easy.
We've got hundreds of deer living within our community. In some ways, it's more even than deer. We've got rock chucks throughout the periphery of our community, particularly around our Ross Park area. We get complaints about skunks and foxes, cougars.
And as Idaho's population grows, so too do the numbers of animal encounters.
We're seeing cats on ski trails, on mountain bike paths, middle of the day, when they're around people. When you start seeing that change in normal mountain lion behavior, that's troublesome from our standpoint. The concern that it escalates and they maybe would start looking at people as a prey source.
Each unique encounter requires a unique response from us.
We could have a mountain lion on the greenbelt. We could have a black bear up somebody's tree. We can have bobcats. People get skunks cruising through their yards, bats roosting on their porch or roosting in their attic. And in some cases, it's an animal just wandering through the yard and doing their thing. But it's, trying to help people live with wildlife in a safe manner for both humans and wildlife.
Because people and wildlife have been and will continue to be fundamentally tied together.
There is a lot of hope behind this idea that animals have come back in places we didn't expect them, or they have arrived in places that weren't built for them in particular. And one of the reasons why it's important is because urban areas are genuine engines for evolution.
Very few people want to see every critter gone. That's part of the mystique of living here, or, just part of the landscape that we live on. And so they recognize that we want to live, in harmony as much as you possibly can. And part of that is wildlife can't change its ways a lot. We can change what we do quite a little bit.
Outdoor Idaho explores the relationship between humans and urban wildlife, and the space in which these two worlds collide.
Funding for Outdoor Idaho is made possible by the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho, by the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Have you ever noticed that wild animals, they never do exactly what we want them to do? Of course, what kind of world would it be if we could control everything? Not wild. Hi, I'm Bruce Reichert, and welcome to Outdoor Idaho. It seems that more and more animals are venturing into towns and cities, raising a ruckus, doing whatever they want, causing us to ask, why the heck don't they stay in the woods where they belong? Sometimes wild animals are a lot closer and bolder than we ever imagined. In fact, it's almost like they've taken over the place.
Get out of the road. You guys get out of the road.
Oh, it's in our house! Oh, there's a duck in our house! Ah! There's a duck in our house!
This urban wildlife makes for great dinner conversations and humorous social media posts.
Open the door! Bring it! Open the door!
But sometimes it's not a laughing matter.
Well, when I found him, he was laying next to the shower in there, and that eyeball was hanging out about down to here.
In December of 2019, mountain lions attacked more than half a dozen pets in the Wood River Valley, including Riley.
The screaming, I mean, he was screaming so loud. I've never heard him scream like that. He's not a fighter. He's not at all. He's a lover.
A friendly mini Aussie that spends his days trailing Mike Cullen around their home in Ketchum.
And he's out there, you know, wanting to be friends with everybody. And this guy wasn't a friend, I'll tell you. And like I said, I would have done anything to get him off there. But like I said, I just thought I was breaking up a dog fight when it first happened. But it wasn't. It wasn't.
Mountain lion sightings and sometimes issues with mountain lions is nothing new in the valley, but what is new is that the numbers that we're starting to receive and some of the situations that we're dealing with.
Mountain lions have evolved to be a very secretive creature. They're nocturnal. They've evolved to be virtually scent-free. They've got retractable claws and heavily padded feet. All of these things are things that make them be very stealthy, very secretive, and very rarely seen. When we start to see a cat act in a way that is uncharacteristic of a secretive mountain lion behavior, i.e. out in the middle of the day, not showing a healthy fear of humans, those are the things that start to give us concern, primarily because we're focused on public safety.
Certainly, we love living in the mountains. That's why people come and live in Ketchum and live in the Wood River Valley. But with that brings its own responsibility. It's about cohabiting with nature, and particularly with mountain lions.
I just a little more cautious. And I tell people, I see people walking down the street at night, walking their poodles or something. I'll go out there and I'll say, you know, my dog got attacked by a mountain lion here a few days ago, and I'd be careful, you know, carry a flashlight or whatever.
It's been great. I mean, when the cougars come around, they usually put postings up everywhere and then just let people know to kind of keep a close eye on the animals.
The exact reason as to why cougar sightings are on the rise is hard to say. Officers with Idaho Fish and Game are working on that, and they have a few ideas.
We have an increase in deer and elk populations that reside and stay year-round in the Wood River Valley. And as those resident deer and elk populations increase, influx of people that are engaging in winter activities, increase in electronic surveillance around their houses, for a variety of reasons, we would expect those sightings to increase.
And these days, with more and more people choosing to live in the woods, on land previously inhabited only by animals, we've greatly increased our chances of coming face to face with the wild.
And typically I don't worry about the mountain lions. I'm outside a lot, and it's just part of it, and it's part of the joy of living up here.
Some say the beauty of the mountain lion, as well as its contributions to a healthy ecosystem, make it an animal worthy of protection.
They're tremendously adaptive and occur there in the southwestern deserts. They occur in subalpine regions, taking a wide array of prey from ground squirrels to elk. It's an amazing species.
Renowned wildlife biologist Morris Hornacher built a 50-year career on research and conservation of big cats, along with tracker Wilbur Wiles.
I'll tell you, any animal, the more you learn about an animal, the more you find out you don't know about him.
Their 10-year study led to the reclassification of mountain lions, from varmint to big game species. No longer was there a $25 bounty for killing this animal. The change in legal status helped stabilize the cougar population and also reflected a growing appreciation of this large cat.
The general feeling was that cougars would, if not killed, would just increase until the numbers, would annihilate everything. Well, they found out that wasn't true, that they regulate their own numbers through this strict territorial. There's only so much room out there.
Despite his passion for this animal, Hornacher draws a hard line when it comes to a big cat making itself comfortable in an urban setting.
I've preached this from day one. We cannot tolerate cougars that are habituated. They are potentially dangerous to pets and to people, particularly children. And all it would take is for one attack on a child in the Wood River Valley that all cougars should be removed. It could be a threat locally and regionally to the entire cougar population. It isn't likely that all cougars will become habituated. They have different personalities, just as your house cats do, just as people's dogs do. They have different personalities. Not all of them are going to be potentially hazardous animals, and they'll find food elsewhere.
In a state as diverse as Idaho, encounters extend beyond just big cats. In Pocatello, for example, hundreds of mule deer are making a home on lawns, hillsides, and next to busy roads.
When you live in a town like this, you expect wildlife, but you don't expect them standing in their yard and giving birth in your garden. The fawns don't know any better. They stay here. It's good living. It's easy living when you're eating on people's lawns and their bushes and their trees and their gardens.
You know, I think we got here because we have this place that's just this narrow valley surrounded by hills and mountains and lots of habitat. Then we have this expanding urban population that's moving out into that wildland, wildlife interface. And so all that together sets up a recipe for seeing some of these challenges that occur with urban wildlife.
It may be easy for the deer, but it hasn't been easy for homeowners. So city leaders established an urban wildlife task force, a collaboration between Idaho Fish and Game, city officials, and local residents to handle the growing number of wildlife complaints.
So what the Urban Wildlife Task Force is trying to do is create an ordinance that will stop people from feeding deer, make them more aware of the problems they're creating by sometimes deliberate and sometimes inadvertent feeding of deer, so that we could at least discourage some of them from setting up residence within our city limits.
Whether or not that ordinance is ever adopted, it's the public education component that matters.
Helping mule deer, and they're helping the wildlife, and in fact they're congregating animals and actually making the situation worse in some cases. They cross roadways and highways here in the community, and they're hit by cars.
But that's not the only problem with feeding wildlife. Mule deer, for example, can't digest certain grains and proteins. So feeding deer, while it might seem nice, can result in bloat or even death. There's also increased opportunity for disease when deer gather to eat food put out by humans.
They aren't pets, and I think people forget that. These aren't cats and dogs. These are wildlife. Even though they're not as afraid of you as they might be, their potential for damage and doing absolutely unpredictable things hasn't changed just because they live in the city.
There are things that you can do that makes it a little easier to live with the wildlife we have here and enjoy the experience while you're at it.
And some people enjoy it more than others, even when it comes to an animal as big as the moose.
The last one that I can remember, I was working here early in the morning, and I had walked across the street to get coffee, and then you could hear the clip-clop of hooves, and there was a moose crossing the street, so skittering across there on ice.
Sometimes, usually, some of the more rural areas or the smaller communities have a fairly high tolerance because there are folks that live in those communities that really enjoy wildlife.
That enjoyment, however, only goes so far, especially when a moose gets aggressive.
Out, there he goes.
And yeah, they're big critters and can be bad if they stand on you or knock you down. Frightened by whether it's a vehicle or somebody coming out or a dog, run into a problem and, injure themselves or get tangled up and become a bigger issue.
I've had to move moose out of perfect moose habitat because of a conflict with a safety concern of a house and people. It's a hard pill to swallow because the moose is living where it's always lived. and then now there's a house there, and it is responsible to move the moose. It's a safety concern. But it does start to force them into marginal habitats, and it can have an impact on populations. So moose in Idaho, they're Shiras moose. They're one of 4 subspecies of moose. They're the smallest of the moose species. There's been some concern on decline. There's a lot of studies going on, and there's a lot of things that people are doing to try to figure out what this is. You know, is it parasites on top of climate, on top of habitat, or is it just who knows what? But there is some concerns across North America on moose. It's not just Idaho.
Fixing moose with radio collars and studying their behaviors will help Idaho Fish and Game get a better understanding of the health of our moose population.
A lot of people associate Idaho with moose, and so they're very important to our citizens, and they're very important to people, both tourism-wise and just a sense of getting out there and seeing a wild animal.
From the moose to the magpie, habitat is everything. Thousands of songbirds make Boise a stopping point on their migrations. And despite the roar of Highway 21, at the Diane Moore Nature Center, bird calls are omnipresent.
That's something we're still trying to understand, is how birds can persist in habitats that obviously aren't ideal, but are still working for them.
I want to get the bird in a really good bandage grip like you do back there when they're working with the bird.
So we're down here today banding songbirds. We have 10 nets set up to safely catch these birds, and we're doing this as part of a continent-wide study of breeding birds.
But the journey to get here is not without risk. A visible example of this in downtown Boise, dozens of birds dead after crashing into an office building.
In Boise, we don't have super tall buildings, but we do have those very reflective buildings, and so we're seeing some species especially very susceptible to hitting windows, and especially during migrations.
Another risk might be curled up to you right at this very moment.
I like cats. A lot of my best friends have cats, but our songbird population in the U.S. since the 1960s has crashed about 40%. And we know the principal causes are squirrel and cats. As for the cats, we know they kill at least 2 billion birds a year in the U.S. And one of the sad things is that kids growing up now don't know what the normal was in 1960 or in 1920 with anything, with butterflies, birds, animals. Their new normal will be most of the trees in this park don't have a nest.
You can kind of talk about birds as the canary in the coal mine. They can be a signal of something else that's wrong in the environment, whether that's habitat loss, pollution, climate change. Pesticides are a really big, or insecticides are a really big problem for birds.
Some wildlife has a way of igniting both fear and wonder. The grizzly bear, for one, despite not being truly urban, its survival largely depends on human behavior.
How big of a threat do humans pose to grizzlies? Well, they're the really only threat to grizzly bears and to grizzly bear recovery. You know, as humans push the urban center further and further out into the realm of the grizzly bear and other wildlife species, then their impacts become more and more. And if bears are going to survive here and people are going to continue to survive with wildlife, we have to be aware of that interface and how to manage ourselves to improve quality of life for everything.
One animal that creates controversy, no matter where it goes, is a bird.
When you think of dangerous animals, most of us don't think of geese until you've encountered this.
Parks and Rec says cutting down on the estimated 5,000 geese living in Denver year-round will improve the health of lakes and ponds.
Geese, they can wreak havoc on your property.
They can be kind of mean. They can also destroy your turf.
Just makes it very, very comfortable for them. But the DNR says now is the time, that small window, to get these guys going or live with their mess.
Standing close to 3 feet tall, the Canada goose is well known, but not always well liked. Its ability to adapt to human spaces has resulted in a species that we've come to expect when we think of golf courses and parks. Geese are so commonplace, sometimes we don't even notice them, until, that is, we look down.
Poop. Goose feces are ubiquitous, and the physiology of the birds leads to an overproduction in an urban setting of goose poop.
So when you get 1,000 geese or a couple thousand geese in a park and they're all, having that many droppings, that's a lot.
I'm tipping toeing so I can get around the poop. Whoa, look at this guy. Look at that guy. He's huge.
We did receive a lot of concern from the public, though, saying, geez, I took my family out, the kids are covered with it, the dog's covered with it, I can't keep them clean, those type of concerns. And they were legitimate concerns.
It's part fun, part gross and challenging. Yeah, they tend to get real dirty on their shoes, of course.
Poop. There's 100.
But they do like chasing them around as long as they don't react in a hissing manner. But they do kind of find some joy in it sometimes. But I do get worried sometimes, especially with our littlest one. She's smaller than them, so they could definitely put her in or corner her or something like that, yeah. He's got us cornered.
I know, I'm like, I don't want to.
Yeah, we'll go this way, okay? Whoop. She doesn't like the poop. She says ew to that all the time. But yeah, it's like, I think she likes chasing them, but she just doesn't like when they react, yeah. That's basically it.
The battle between park management and resident geese has endured for decades, with city officials trying just about everything to keep the goose population at reasonable levels.
Oh, we took them to areas in the Weiser Payette area. We tried to find fields for them to relocate. A lot of them, though, Fish and Game would take them to a location, and sometimes those birds would beat them back to Boise.
What did work, though, at least in Boise, were dogs.
You could watch them in the parks. Every time a dog ran toward the geese would take flight. People needed areas to take their pets to exercise them, and our parks were a perfect situation for that. Then the geese were getting trained not to come there year-round, and it was very successful.
But aren't geese supposed to fly south for the winter? Well, there's a story behind that.
In the 19th century, geese were what's for dinner, and a lot of farmers began to use live decoys, which was essentially tying a goose to your barn so that they would honk and other geese would land there. And through that process of live decoys, geese learned to stop at particular ponds, and they would stop at those ponds and stay there. After generations of this happening, a segment of the goose population became urban geese.
Some geese still migrate, but some stay put, making the Canada goose an incredibly adaptable bird. The ability to adapt, it's a skill required not only by animals, but by humans too.
I mean, that's one of the hardest things to teach anyone, whether it's a 2-year-old kid or, a 60-year-old, male hunter from Orofino, to just listen to other people, even though their opinions are different, and then find some common ground.
4 million people visited the park last year, thousands of backcountry camp nights, lots of things, etc.
And although our relationship with wildlife may occasionally be rocky, there's joy animals bring to humans that's hard to dispute.
Very few people want to see every critter gone. That's part of the mystique of living here, or just part of the landscape that we live on. And so they recognize that we want to live, in harmony as much as you possibly can. And part of that is wildlife can't change its ways a lot. We can change what we do quite a little bit.
That change happens when the space between humans and animals blurs. And we realize what's ours is theirs too. And although the urban setting may not be ideal for wildlife, It's worth admiring the resolve of a species to survive within it.
Is because urban areas are genuine engines for evolution, and animals change and adapt to their human companions and to their human competitors.
You wouldn't believe how many there are back here.
And that engine of evolution changes the trajectory for wildlife, but it also, I think, gives us a lot of hope for human coexistence with animals. It doesn't have to be a relationship of us versus them or extinguish the population because it's a nuisance.
He's out of the water.
Oh my God.
And what is life anyway, without a bit of hope?
Funding for Outdoor Idaho is made possible by the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho, by the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. To find more information about these shows, visit us at idahoptv.org.